Dear all viewers, you are listening the Alpha's King love story. In that story, you will enjoy lot of thrilled, love, and more interesting ending. Before starting story, please subscribe my channel because your one like and subscribe means a lot to me. And after it, please share your thoughts on comments, and if you like the story, so share it with your circle as well. Now let's start the story. Chapter 1. Whispers of the Thornheart pack claimed the Alpha King's heir was not merely broken, but cursed. Young Kaelen Thornheart had not uttered a single word since the night of the great fire that consumed his mother. He did not simply turn away from the noblewomen vying to become the new Luna. He met them with teeth and claws, a small storm of fury. Alpha Theron Thornheart, a king who had conquered mountains, felt his hope wither, believing his son would grow into a shadow of ice and rage. But then, a trembling servant girl entered the solar. She was there to clean the shattered remnants of a priceless urn. She did not glance at the king. Her gaze, soft as dawn, fell upon the boy, and in a silence that stilled the very hearth fire, the child who despised all stretched out a tiny grubby hand and breathed the one word the entire realm thought lost forever: Mother. This is the tale of how the most unseen soul in the kingdom saved its heir, and the ancient whispering darkness that sought to devour them both for it. The sound was not merely glass breaking, it was the shattering of yet another fragile hope, echoing through the stone corridors of Stonehaven Keep. Alpha Theron Thornheart did not startle, he simply closed his eyes, his fingers pressing into the tension blooming at the bridge of his nose, exhaling a breath that carried the scent of aged parchment and deep, weary exhaustion. He was the wolf of the north, a man who had forged his kingdom from warring clans and unforgiving winters. Yet in this moment, he was utterly besieged by a force 4 summers old. "Unhand me, you wretched creature!" The piercing cry belonged to Lady Elara Vance, daughter of a southern alpha. She was a vision of silk and carefully curated grace, her perfume a cloying cloud of jasmine and ambition. She was the 9th noble lady Theron had received this season, each one a candidate for the vacant role of Luna, or more plainly, a stepmother for his son. Theron opened eyes the color of a winter sky and strode into the receiving room. The scene was one of elegant devastation. A celestial porcelain urn, a gift from the Eastern emperors, lay in cruel fragments across a woven rug from across the sea. Lady Elara clutched her wrist, where the clear imprint of small, sharp teeth was already blossoming into an ugly bruise. And there, standing defiantly on the heavy oak table, was Kaelen. The boy was slight for his age, a wisp of dark hair and piercing amber eyes that mirrored his father's, but now they burned with feral panic and unbridled anger. A low, continuous growl rumbled from his small chest, a sound more suited to a cornered wolf cub than a child. "He bit me," Elara shrilled, her composure fraying like cheap thread. "Theron, this boy is untamed. He requires a firm hand and a locked door, not a mother's touch." The very air in the chamber grew heavy and cold. Theron took a single step forward, his alpha aura swelling like a sudden storm. The flames in the great hearth guttered. "Choose your next words with immense care, Elara." His voice rumbled, deceptively soft, a promise of thunder. "You speak of my son and my heir." "He is a menace," she spat, her fear twisting into venom. "I merely reached to adjust his tunic, and he flew at me like a wild thing. If I am to be your Luna, I will have him sent to the Grey Friars. Let them beat the savagery out of him. The boy is clearly damaged." Theron's arms swept toward the arched doorway. Leave, now, before I forget the alliance between our houses and remember only the insult to my blood." Elara's face drained of all color. Gathering the torn silk of her sleeve, she fled, the frantic tapping of her heels a fading echo on the flagstones. A thick, suffocating quiet remained. Theron looked at his son. Kaelen did not retreat. He stood his ground on the table, his little chest heaving, fists knotted into tight balls. He was terrified, Theron could see in the tremble of his lower lip, but he wore his fear like armor. It had been 2 long years since the fire, 2 years since his mate Seraphina had been taken, 2 years since Kaelen's voice had vanished into the smoke. "Kaelen," Theron said, his voice attempting to gentle, though the command in it was bone deep. "Come down." Kaelen shook his head, a violent, desperate motion. "I said come down. You cannot bite our guests." Kaelen bared his teeth in a silent snarl. His small hand darted out, seizing a heavy candlestick from the table. With all his might, he threw it. Theron caught it effortlessly, his fingers closing around the cold metal an inch from his temple. The defiance, however, struck true and deep. "Captain Evander." A moment later, his beta, a sturdy man with kind eyes and silver threading his dark hair, appeared in the doorway. "My Alpha?" "Have this cleared," he growled, turning away because the sight of his son's shattered spirit was a pain he could not bear. "And send for the next candidate. I care not who. Find someone the boy will view as an enemy." Evander's voice was gentle but firm. "There are no more, Alpha. Lady Elara was the last. The others, they have heard the stories. They are afraid." Theron stared out the tall window at the dark, brooding pines of his territory. A king without a queen, ruling a kingdom with a prince at war with the world. Then find a governess, a nursemaid from the village, a hedge witch. I care not. Just find someone. Evander bowed his head and retreated. Theron remained, a statue of frustration, until a soft, shuffling sound pulled him from his thoughts. He turned. A girl was kneeling by the table. She was not a candidate. She wore the rough-spun, dove-gray dress of the castle's scullery staff, the Omegas, the quiet, unseen threads of the pack. She was small, her frame so slight the very dress seemed to swallow her. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was tied back in a simple plait, but strands had escaped to curtain part of her face. She was carefully gathering the shards of the urn with her bare hands. "Leave it," he commanded, his voice sharper than intended. She flinched, a minute tremor, but did not stop. "It is my duty, my Alpha," she whispered, her voice like the sound of a distant stream, soft and clear.
He paid her no further mind, his gaze sweeping the room. "Where is Kaelen?" The girl paused, a long, curved fragment of blue and white porcelain hovering in her palm. Slowly, she lifted a trembling finger toward the far corner of the room, behind a large tapestry depicting a legendary hunt. Theron strode over, ready to pluck his son from hiding, but he halted, his breath catching. Kaelen was curled into a tight ball behind the heavy fabric, shivering, but he was not hiding from his father. His wide, amber eyes were fixed on the girl, the Omega. The girl, her name he would later learn was Elara, did not look at the Alpha. She seemed to feel the child's stare. Without glancing up from her task, she began to hum. It was no courtly tune or marching song. It was a strange, plaintive melody, something old and rooted in the land, a song of mourning and mossy stones. Theron watched, utterly still, as Kaelen's trembling began to ease. The boy uncurled, a slow and cautious movement. He crept out from behind the tapestry. Theron tensed, ready to spring forward. If Kaelen attacked an Omega, Pack law would demand she be punished for provoking the Alpha heir, and he had no stomach for disciplining a scullery maid today. "Boy," Theron warned, his voice low. Kaelen ignored him. He took one step, then another toward Elara. She stopped her gathering. She sat back on her heels and turned her head. She did not bow. She did not bare her throat in submission. She simply looked at the child. Her eyes were a startling shade of violet, like twilight shadows on deep snow, a color Theron had never seen in any wolf. "Hello," she whispered to the boy. Her voice was barely audible. "Did the lady with the loud voice frighten you? She frightened me, too." Theron held his breath. Kaelen typically shrieked when strangers addressed him. Instead, Kaelen sniffed the air. He leaned closer to Elara. She smelled of hearth smoke, dried lavender, and plain lye soap, nothing like the overpowering perfumes of the high-born ladies. Kaelen reached out a small, grubby hand and touched a loose strand of hair that had escaped her plate. Elara did not pull away. A sad, genuine smile touched her pale, tired face. "You have your father's eyes," she told him softly. "They are fierce." Kalen's lower lip wobbled. The tears he had battled during his rage now spilled over, tracing clean paths through the dust on his cheeks. With a choked sound, he lunged forward, not to bite, but to cling. His small arms wrapped around Elara's neck, and he buried his face in the rough gray fabric of her dress. Theron took a step, shock rendering him mute. "Kaelen?" he asked, his voice cracking with shock. The boy only tightened his grip on the maid. He took a great, ragged, shuddering breath, and then a sound, rusty and fractured with disuse, tore from his small throat. "Mother!" The silence that followed was profound, a living thing that pressed upon the ears. Theron felt as if the wind had been knocked from him. He stared at the Omega, who was now awkwardly, gently patting the back of the Alpha heir, her own violet eyes wide with terror as they finally met the Alpha King's gaze. "What magic is this?" Theron breathed, his voice trembling with a torrent of awe, suspicion, and a desperate, fragile hope. I only saw a sad little boy, my Alpha, not a monster." Chapter 2. A Gilded Cage of Thorns. Half an hour later, Elara found herself perched on the very edge of a high-backed leather chair in the Alpha private study. The chair was older than her grandmother and seemed to swallow her whole. Kaelen was asleep on a fur rug before the crackling fire, one small hand still fisted in the hem of her gray apron. Each time she tried to gently loosen his grip to stand, he whimpered in his sleep, and Alpha Theron's steely gaze would pin her back to her seat. Kaelen Thornheart sat behind a vast desk of dark, scarred oak, reading from a single sheet of parchment, her life reduced to ink. "Elara," he read aloud, his voice giving nothing away. "Age 20, Omega, parents deceased, raised by a maternal grandmother in the lower village, entered service at Stonehaven 6 months past, prior occupation seamstress's apprentice in the town." "Yes, Alpha," Elara murmured, staring at her own hands resting in her lap. They were red and raw from scrubbing pots and stones. "You have no mate, no sworn allegiance to another Alpha, no children of your own." "No, Alpha." Theron set the parchment down and leaned forward, his wintry eyes capturing hers. "I have a proposition for you." "My Alpha, I swear I meant no interference with the young master. Please do not dismiss me. My grandmother, she is ill, and the healer's fees—" "I am not dismissing you," Theron interrupted, his voice cutting through her panic. "I am altering your position." He slid a different piece of parchment across the desk. Elara picked it up. It was a contract. The terms listed made her vision blur. A monthly stipend that was a fortune, a chamber in the family wing, a personal allowance for clothes. Her duties, sole attendant to the Alpha heir. "You wish for me to be his nursemaid?" she breathed. "No," Farron said. "I can hire a dozen nursemaids. Kaelen has bitten 3. What he needs, what the court physicians mutter about but cannot provide, is emotional anchoring. He has attached himself to you. If removing you causes him to withdraw again, I cannot allow it." He paused, his gaze drifting to his sleeping son, his expression unreadable. "I want you to be his constant companion. You will move into the chamber adjoining his. You will take your meals with him. You will be responsible for his daily routine and his peace."
Elara's heart thudded against her ribs. "Alpha, I cannot live in the family quarters. I am an Omega. The nobles, the warriors, they will see it as an affront. Lady Elara's friends, they already look through me as if I were glass." "Let them glare," Theron growled, a flicker of that stormy aura returning. "You will be under my direct protection. Is that all?" Elara sensed the unspoken weight in the air. "There is more," she stated, not a question. Theron hesitated, a rare show of uncertainty. "The stability of the Thornheart line is under scrutiny. Our allied pacts, the Council of Elders, they see a broken heir and a king without a mate. They whisper that if I cannot bring order to my own hearth, I cannot hold the borders." He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the desk, his scent of pine and cold stone enveloping her. "You will not merely be his companion in private, Elara. In public, at gatherings, you will act as his guardian. You will stand with him at formal functions. You will sit at the high table during feasts. You will present, for all to see, a picture of stability for the heir." Her fingers went cold. "You wish me to pretend? To play the part of his mother?" "No," Theron corrected, sharp and immediate. "I will never take another mate. Seraphina was my fated one. That bond is eternal. This is an arrangement of necessity. You provide the calm my son requires, and in return I will ensure your grandmother receives the best care in the kingdom. The royal healers will attend her. Any medicine, any treatment she needs." Her fingers froze. Her grandmother was her world. The cough that racked her frail body was growing worse, and the local healer had spoken of a sickness deep in the lungs. This offer was not just gold, it was a lifeline. But to step into the glittering, vicious world of the court, to pretend to be worthy of standing beside the Alpha King, it was a different kind of death sentence. The high-born she-wolves would see her as a usurper, a weed in their pristine garden. She looked at Kaelen. In sleep, his face was finally soft, the constant tension gone. He sighed, his fingers tightening on her apron. "I will do it," Elara whispered, the words leaving her lips before fear could reclaim them. Theron gave a single, curt nod. "Good. Sign it." With a hand that trembled only slightly, Elara dipped the quill into the inkwell and signed her name. The ink looked black as a promise, or a curse. "Welcome to the Thorn's Heart, Elara," Theron said, though his tone held no warmth. "Gather your belongings. You take up your new quarters tonight." As Elara left the study, the precious contract clutched to her chest like a shield. She nearly collided with Captain Evander in the torchlit corridor. "He signed you then?" Captain Evander asked, his kind eyes filled with a deep concern. "He did." Elara sighed, stepping closer and lowering her voice. "Walk carefully, child. Lady Elara did not depart quietly. She waits in the courtyard, and she saw you enter the Alpha's study and not emerge. The viper has been poked, and she knows your scent now." "I am just a servant," Elara said, trying to convince herself. "Not anymore," Evander murmured grimly. "Now you are a rival." Back in the study, Theron stood at the window, watching the first stars prick the violet dusk. The strange tightness in his chest had not eased.
He told himself it was relief, the loosening of a knot of dread he had carried for 2 years, but something deeper, an instinct older than kingship stirred. His wolf, usually a quiet, commanding presence within, was restless. When the little Omega had met his eyes, for a fleeting second, he had not seen a cowed servant. He had seen a silent strength, a resilience that mirrored the ancient standing stones on the moors, and that unsettled him more than any border skirmish. Chapter 3: The Solstice and the Serpent. The Omega quarters were a warren of small, damp rooms in the lowest level of the keep, smelling of damp wool and hard work. Elara's new chamber was not just a room, it was a realm. It was larger than her grandmother's entire cottage, with a window that looked out over the moon-washed forest, a bed wider than a river stream piled with furs and linens, and a fireplace that already held a cheerful blaze. She slept fitfully, haunted by the enormity of her decision, and woke not to the dawn bell, but to the soft weight of a small body wiggling under the furs beside her. "Mama, up!" Elara's eyes flew open. Kaelen was curled against her side, his amber eyes, clear and alert, watching her. He was smiling. It was a shy, unpracticed expression that transformed his solemn face into one of heartbreaking sweetness. "Kaelen," a deep voice chided from the doorway, "a prince does not invade the chambers of his attendants." Theron stood there, already dressed for the day in a dark tunic and trousers, his hair still damp from washing. He looked every inch the warrior king, and for a dizzying moment, Elara forgot to breathe. "It is no trouble, Alpha," she said quickly, sitting up and pulling the furs to her chin. "He was cold, perhaps." "He is the Alpha heir," Theron said, stepping into the room. He placed a small, heavy velvet pouch at the foot of the bed. "He must learn propriety, and you must learn to look the part." He nodded at the pouch. "Captain Evander will escort you to the town today. Purchase proper garments. No more gray wool. You are now a visible part of this household. Tonight is the great solstice feast. The heads of all major families will be here. You will sit at the high table with Kaelen. You must appear as if you belong there." Her fingers went cold. "Tonight? But Alpha, I know nothing of court manners, the protocols, the—" "Kaelen trusts you," Theron stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "That is the only credential required. Do not shame him." With that, he turned and left. The trip to the market town was a surreal dream. Evander, a patient shadow, guided her to merchants who catered to the nobility. At first, the shopkeepers eyed her simple dress with dismissive scorn, but when Evander mentioned the Alpha's coin, their demeanor shifted to obsequious attention. Elara was measured, draped in silks and fine wools, shown jewels she would never have dared to touch. She chose practical things, a few well-made day dresses in deep blue and forest green, and for the feast, a gown of violet velvet, the color of her eyes, high-necked and long-sleeved, its simplicity its own elegance.
They returned to Stonehaven as the winter afternoon faded. Elara bathed in the startling luxury of a copper tub in her own room, dressed in the new gown, and braided her hair into an intricate crown, leaving a few tendrils loose. The reflection in the polished metal mirror was a stranger, a lady of quiet grace, not a scullery maid. When she descended to the great hall with Kaelen, Theron was waiting at the base of the stairs. He looked at her, a long, assessing glance that swept from the braided crown to the hem of her gown. "Adequate," he pronounced, the closest he would come to praise. But his gaze lingered on the way the velvet brought out the unusual shade of her eyes. "Stay near me," he instructed, offering his arm. It was like living granite. "If anyone asks, you are a distant cousin from the Silvermane pack, here as Kaelen's tutor, a widow." "Lying to the entire court," Elara whispered as they walked. "Preserving the peace of the pack," he corrected, his voice low. They entered the great hall. It was a cavern of stone and light, filled with the rumble of voices and the scent of roasting meat and perfumed nobles. As Alpha Theron stepped onto the dais, a hush fell, thick and immediate. Then the whispers began, a hissing undercurrent. Who is she? Why does the heir cling to her? Why is she on the Alpha's arm? Theron led her to the high table. Seated a few places down, flanked by her stern-faced father, was Lady Elara Vance. When her eyes landed on Elara, the goblet of wine in her hand froze halfway to her lips. "You cannot be serious," Elara Vance hissed, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Theron, you bring the scullery maid to the solstice feast? This is an insult to every noble house present." Theron calmly held a chair for Elara. "Elara is Kaelen's companion and tutor. She is an honored guest in my hall." "An honored guest?" Lady Elara laughed, a sound like shattering crystal. "She reeks of kitchen herbs and peasant fear. Look at her, she's a mouse in a gown." Kaelen shrank against Elara's side, a low whimper in his throat. Lady Elara rose, swaying slightly from wine, and stalked toward them. "Is it true?" she sneered, leaning down so her perfumed breath washed over Elara. "Did you beguile the simple boy with kitchen sweets? Or perhaps you simply know how to make yourself small and useful, like all your kind." Elara felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. The old instinct screamed to lower her head, to vanish. But she felt Kaelen's hand tighten in hers, his small body trembling. He needed a protector, not a ghost. Slowly, Elara stood. She was not tall, but she met Lady Elara's spite-filled gaze squarely. "I may be an Omega, my lady," Elara said, her voice not loud but clear as a bell in the hushed hall. "But I seem I have accomplished in one afternoon what you could not in an entire season." She paused, letting the words hang. "I offered your son kindness, and he accepted it." A collective intake of breath swept the room, an Omega publicly rebuking an Alpha's daughter. Lady Elara's face mottled with rage, her fingers curled, claws threatening to extend. "You insolent gutter wench," she spat, her hand rising, sharp nails gleaming in the firelight. Theron tensed, a growl building in his chest, but before he could move, a small figure darted in front of Elara. "No!" Kaelen's voice was not a childish shriek, it was a raw, powerful command that cracked through the air. He stood before Elara, arms spread wide, his small body a shield. His amber eyes glowed with a faint, ethereal light. "No, hurt my mama." The force in the words was primal and pure. It was not the command of a child, but the protective instinct of an Alpha heir awakened. Lady Elara stumbled back as if struck. Lord Vance dropped his goblet, wine bleeding like a wound across the white tablecloth. Theron rose, a slow, dominant motion that silenced the last of the whispers. He did not look at Lady Elara. He addressed the hall. "You have heard the prince." His voice was iron wrapped in velvet. "If you hear him—" He turned his glacial gaze to Lady Elara. "Sit down, or be removed." Humiliated and seething, Lady Elara sank back into her chair, her eyes promising murder. Theron resumed his seat. Under the table, his hand found Elara's, giving her fingers a brief, firm squeeze. "That was foolishly brave," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "And do not do it again. My protection cannot stop a dagger in the dark." Elara's heart was a wild bird in her chest. "I thought your protection was absolute, my Alpha." Theron looked at her then, and in the depths of his winter eyes she saw a new emotion flicker, a grudging, fierce respect. He said, "It is, but even a king cannot watch every shadow. You have made an enemy today. Remember that." Chapter 4, Whispers in the Snow-Laden Woods. Weeks settled into a strange new rhythm. Elara's days were filled with Kaelen. She discovered he was clever, with a quiet curiosity about insects and birds. She taught him his letters using sticks in the hearth ash, and he began to string words together, his voice gaining strength. The nightmares still came, visions of fire and loss that left him screaming into the night. But now Elara was there to hold him, to sing the old mournful songs until his breathing evened. Theron was a constant brooding presence. He joined them for the evening meal, observing their interactions with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. He began to conduct his evening correspondence in the solar where they sat, the scratch of his quill a companionous sound alongside Kaelen's quiet play. A tension, not unpleasant, but alive with unspoken things, grew in the space between the Alpha and the Omega. Elara would catch him watching the line of her throat as she read, or he would find himself arrested by the melody of her laugh. It was a dangerous precipice, and they both felt it. The fragile peace was shattered one crisp afternoon. Elara took Kaelen to the Royal Hunting Park, a walled forest at the keep's edge where the trees grew thick and ancient. Kaelen was chasing the flight of a bright blue jay, his laughter a rare and precious sound. "Look, Mama, footprints," he called, crouching by a muddy patch. I smiled, seated on a fallen log. "Fox, perhaps. Be gentle, my heart." Suddenly, the forest fell silent. The jay's chatter ceased. The very air grew silent and heavy. An old primal fear, the fear of the prey, prickled along Elara's skin. She stood, her eyes scanning the dense, snow-dusted undergrowth. "Kaelen, come to me, now." The boy, sensing the change in her voice, abandoned the tracks and ran. As his small boots crunched on the frozen leaves, the shadows beneath the pines coalesced and moved.
3 wolves leaped over the high stone wall. They were not the sleek, disciplined hunters of the pack. They were rogues, outcasts, their fur matted and dull, eyes gleaming with a feral, hungry madness. They had bypassed the posted guards. Elara's blood turned to ice. "Run, Kaelen, to the keep!" The largest rogue, a brutish creature with a mangled ear, lunged not for her, but for the child. Elara did not think. Her own wolf was a faint, timid thing, useless in a fight. So she used her body. She threw herself between the beast and Kaelen, wrapping him in her arms and turning her back to the claws and Keith. She braced for the impact, the tearing pain. Instead, a deafening crack split the air, followed by a pained yelp. The rogue wolf was thrown backward as if it had slammed into an invisible wall. It shook its massive head, snarling in confusion. Elara gasped, scrambling back with Kaelen. What magic was this? The rogue recovered, its madness outweighing its surprise. It gathered itself to spring again. This time, a black bolt of fury shot from the trees. Theron. He was in his wolf form, a magnificent, terrifying beast of shadow and muscle, larger than any wolf had a right to be. He met the rogue in midair, a collision of teeth and rage. The fight was brutal, swift. Theron's jaws found the rogue's throat, and it was over. But there were 2 more. Theron whirled to face them, a growl shaking the ground. One circled, aiming for his flank. The other, seeing the Alpha occupied, turned its savage gaze back to Elara and the boy. Theron roared, trying to disengage, but the second rogue clamped onto his hind leg. He was trapped. The third rogue charged. Elara backed against the rough bark of a great pine, Kaelen sobbing into her skirts. There was nowhere to go. A surge of heat, wild and golden and utterly foreign, erupted in her chest. It was not fear, it was power. "Stay back!" The words tore from her, not a scream, but a command. The air around her shimmered with a faint silver light. The charging rogue skidded to a halt mere feet away. It whined, a high, pitiful sound, and lowered its head, its body trembling as it fought against its own instincts, compelled by a force it could not understand. Theron, having finally dispatched the second wolf, limped around, expecting a massacre. He saw the third rogue cowering before Elara, who stood pale and shaking, one hand outstretched as if to hold back the tide. With a final, powerful lunge, Theron ended the rogue's life. Silence returned, only broken by Theron's ragged pants and Kaelen's muffled cries. Theron shifted back to human form, naked and blood-streaked, his side bleeding from a deep gash. He ignored his own wounds, stumbling to Elara. "Are you bitten? Is Kaelen—" "We are unhurt," Elara whispered, her voice trembling. She covered Kaelen's eyes. Theron looked at the dead rogue at her feet. He looked at the drag marks in the snow where it had stopped its charge. He looked at Elara. "How?" he breathed, his own shock evident. "It had you. Why did it yield?" I do not know," Elara stammered, the strange heat in her chest cooling to a dull, frightened throb. "I just told it to stop." Theron's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, ignoring propriety, and inhaled near the curve of her neck. Beneath the scent of frost and fear and her simple lavender soap, there was something new, faint like the memory of a lightning strike, ozone and old stone. "Evander!" Theron's roar was an alpha summons. Within moments, his beta and a squad of guards were in the clearing. "Secure the woods, and send for Alaric now." Alaric Torn was Theron's younger brother, the pack's chief healer, and a scholar of old bloodlines. He lived in a secluded tower within the keep, a place of herbs and ancient texts. 2 hours later, Elara sat on a stool in Alaric's cluttered study, wrapped in a blanket. Kaelen slept in an adjoining room, guarded. Alaric, a gentler version of his brother with thoughtful gray eyes, peered at a drop of her blood through a magnifying lens. "Well?" Theron demanded, his impatience a live thing in the small room. "She is physically unharmed," Alaric said slowly. He looked at Elara with dawning realization. "You are recorded as an Omega. Your parents were Omegas?" "Yes," Elara said. "My wolf, she is very quiet. I have never been able to shift." "That is not because she is quiet, Elara," Alaric said gently. "It is because she has been silenced." He held up a vial containing a residue scraped from a rogue's claw. "This is not natural filth. It is wolfsbane, mixed with something else, a binding agent, and I found traces of the same agent, old and layered, in your blood. Someone has been administering a suppressant to you, likely since childhood, keeping your true nature dormant." Elara stared, uncomprehending. "My true nature?" "The power you use today, that was not Omega submission, that was Alpha command, a pure, undiluted form of it." Alaric turned to his brother. "Someone went to great lengths to hide what she is." Theron's face was like carved stone. "Who, and why?" "That," Alaric said, "is the question. But if someone wanted her power hidden, they will not be pleased to find it waking." "Lady Elara?" Elara whispered, thinking of the venom in the noblewoman's eyes. "No," Theron shook his head. "She is spite, not strategy. This is older. This touches your lineage." He turned to Alaric. "This stays between us. If the council hears an Omega used a primal command—" "They would call it witchcraft or treason," Alaric finished grimly. "I will be silent." Theron looked back at Elara. The way he looked at her had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a solution to a problem. She was a mystery, a secret, a treasure he suddenly needed to guard with his life. "We return to the keep," Theron ordered. "Elara, you will stay in my chambers tonight." "What?" The word was a squeak of disbelief. "The rogues knew where you would be," Theron said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "They bypassed guards. There is a traitor within our walls. Until I find them, you will be where I can protect you." He paused, his gaze holding hers. "You will sleep in my bed." The journey back to the keep was made in a thick silence, broken only by Kaelen's sleepy murmurs. The fluttering in Elara's stomach had nothing to do with wolfsbane, and everything to do with the terrifying, inevitable pull she felt toward the stern king beside her, and the even more terrifying thought that she might never wish to leave his side.
but in the deep shadows of the stable yard, a figure watched the royal party return. The figure pulled a hood lower over her face and slipped a small folded piece of parchment into the claw of a waiting messenger hawk. As the bird took off, silent as a ghost, the figure whispered words that were lost to the wind. The moon's daughter stirs, the seal cracks, the eclipse comes.
Chapter 5. The Alpha's Hearth. The Alpha King's bedchamber was a testament to stark power and somber comfort. It was dominated by a massive bed of dark carved wood, piled with furs and draped in heavy, undyed wool. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls hung with maps and weapons. The air smelled of cedar smoke, leather, and the clean, cold scent that was uniquely Theron. Elara stood just inside the door, clutching a pillow she had brought from her own room, feeling like a ghost in a shrine. Kaelen was asleep in the small antechamber, a guard posted at his door. "Take the bed," Theron said, his back to her as he shrugged out of his blood-stained tunic. He moved with a warrior's economy, tossing the ruined garment aside. The firelight played over the hard plains of his back, revealing a tapestry of old scars, silver lines against tanned skin, each a story of battle. Elara quickly averted her eyes, her cheeks warming. "I can sleep on the rug by the fire," she offered, her voice small. "I am used to little comfort." "You are not an Omega," he said again, the words a quiet rumble. He turned, his gaze serious. "You are a puzzle, and until I solve it, you are under my protection. Get in the bed. I will take the chair." Elara obeyed, sliding between the furs. They smelled deeply of him, a scent that was both intimidating and strangely soothing. She lay rigid on the very edge, a sliver of space. Theron emerged from his washing area, now clad in simple linen trousers. His chest was still bare, the scars more visible in the steady firelight. He glanced at the bed, then at the stiff, high-backed chair by the window. He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Move over." Elara froze. "My Alpha?" "The chair is for formal audiences, not sleep. And if an assassin comes through that window, I need to be able to reach you instantly." His logic was ironclad, but his voice held a strange tension. "Move to the center." Heart hammering, Elara shifted until she was surrounded by furs in the middle of the vast bed. Theron climbed in beside her, staying rigidly on his own side, leaving a respectful foot of space. Yet the heat from his body was a palpable force, bridging the gap, wrapping around her in the cool room. They lay in silence, listening to the wind moan through the arrow slits. The intimacy was terrifying, a new kind of battlefield. "Did you love her very much?" The question slipped out before Elara could stop it, born of the darkness and the shared vulnerability. The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Seraphina," Theron said, his voice a low vibration in the mattress. "She was my fated mate. The moon goddess crafted our souls to be two halves of one whole. So, yes, it was a complete love, a sure love, like the sun rising." He shifted, turning his head to look at her profile in the dim light. "What I felt today in those woods, when that beast turned on you, that was not sure. It was chaos. It was terror." Elara's breath caught in her throat. The confession hung between them, raw and undeniable. "Theron, Sleep, Elara," he commanded softly, but the edge was gone from his voice. "Tomorrow we hunt more than wolves." Morning brought not clarity, but a gathering storm. Rain lashed the gray stones of Stonehaven, mirroring the tension in Theron's war room. Theron, Alaric, and Captain Evander stood over a map. Elara sat in the corner, Kaelen building a fortress with wooden blocks at her feet. "I traced the breach in the perimeter. Evander reported, his face grim. The wards on the hunting part gate were not failed, Alpha. They were carefully disarmed, from the inside. Theron's fist came down on the table, making the wood groan. Who has that authorization? Only the Gamma, the head of your personal guard, and myself. It gets worse. He placed a small, blackened, twisted piece of metal on the map. It's the remains of a far-speaking device, not pack-made, southern craftsmanship. The last signal was sent just after the attack. Theron picked up the scorched relic, his expression turned to ice. Can it be traced? To a general region, yes. The signal points toward the Silverfang territories, but that is not all. Evander took a deep breath. One of the rogue's bodies, it bore a mark, a brand hidden beneath the matted fur, a circle eclipsed by a crescent. Alaric sucked in a sharp breath. The Order of the Eclipse, they are a myth, a fireside tale to frighten pups. They seem very real today, Theron growled. What do your old books say of them, brother? Alaric's scholarly demeanor tightened with dread. Legends, they are a cult, it is said, that believes the first wolves were a mistake, that the moon goddess's true power was meant for a single pure line. They seek to find the moon's daughter, the last of that line, and use her blood to eclipse all other alphas, to create a world with only one pack under their control. It is fanatic nonsense. Elara's blood ran cold. Moon's daughter, the same words the shadowy figure had whispered. It is not nonsense if they are trying to kill my son, Theron said, his voice deadly quiet. He looked at Elara, and the pieces clicked into a horrifying picture. Or they are trying to take what they believe is theirs. Before anyone could speak, a frantic knock came at the door. A young guardsman drenched from the rain burst in. Alpha, forgive the intrusion. A messenger from the southern pass. He's ridden hard, says it's urgent. A mud-spattered man was ushered in. He bore the crest of an allied border pack. Alpha Theron, he gasped, bowing. My Alpha sends warning. He intercepted a contingent of mercenaries, not wolves, humans, trying to cross into your lands from the unclaimed wastes. They carried this. The messenger held out a rolled parchment sealed with black wax impressed with a crescent over circle. Theron broke the seal and read. His face, already grim, became a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He crushed the parchment in his fist. What does it say? Elara asked, rising to her feet. Theron's eyes found hers, and in them she saw a storm of protectiveness and fear. It is a bill of sale for a living vessel of celestial blood, and a secondary bounty for the Thornheart heir alive and unharmed. They were not after Kaelen to kill him today. They were after him to use as leverage, for you. The room seemed to tilt. Elara swayed, her hand flying to the wall for support. Kaelen, sensing her distress, abandoned his blocks and clung to her leg. We must leave, Alaric said urgently. Stonehaven is compromised. They know she is here.
No, Theron said, his voice regaining its steely control. Running makes us prey. We fortify. We turn this keep into a trap. He turned to Evander. Triple the guard on the inner gates. Change all the watchwords. No one enters or leaves without my personal seal. And bring Gamma Roderick to me, now. But when Evander returned minutes later, he was alone, and his face was ashen. Alpha, Roderick is gone. His quarters are empty, his personal effects missing, and the mark, the Eclipse brand, we found it branded into the wood of his desk. Theron's betrayal was a physical blow. Roderick had been his friend since boyhood, the commander of his most trusted warriors. The poison of the Eclipse had been festering at the very heart of his kingdom. Find him, Theron whispered, the words a vow of violence. Track him to the ends of the earth, but first we secure our own.
his gaze locked on Elara. "From this moment, you do not leave my sight. You and Kaelen will be moved to the highest tower, the stone tower. It has one entrance, walls 10 feet thick, and can be defended by 3 men against an army." Elara nodded, numb with fear, but also with a dawning, fierce determination. They wanted her blood. They wanted to use her son. A fire she never knew she possessed began to smolder in her chest, right beside the strange, sleeping power. As they gathered a few essentials, Theron stood close to her, his voice for her ears alone. "You are afraid. That is wise. But you are not alone in this. Your fight is now my fight. Your safety is the safety of my pack. Do you understand?" Elara looked up at him, at the unshakable resolve in his winter eyes. For the first time, she did not see just a king fulfilling a duty. She saw a man standing as a shield. "I understand," she said. And she did. Chapter 6. The Stone Tower. The Stone Tower was the oldest part of Stonehaven, a bleak, cylindrical fortress rising from the heart of the keep. Its sole entrance was a narrow, iron-reinforced door at the top of a spiraling staircase that could be collapsed if needed. The chamber within was circular, sparsely furnished with a large bed, a table and chairs. A single slit window, too narrow for even a child to pass through, offered a sliver of view over the rain-swept courtyard. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautiful prison. For 3 days they lived in this suspended world. Kaelen, confused but comforted by Elara's constant presence, played with his toys on the fur rugs. Theron conducted the business of his threatened kingdom from the heavy oak table, messengers coming and going with grim reports. Elara tried to maintain normalcy, telling Kaelen's stories, mending clothes, but her every sense was stretched taut, waiting for the next blow. On the 4th night, the blow came. It began with the bells, not the measured call to prayer, but the frantic, clanging alarm of the watchtower. Shouts and the clash of steel echoed up from the courtyard, muffled by the thick walls. Theron was on his feet in an instant, a sword in his hand that had been leaning against the wall. "Evander," he barked into the speaking tube by the door. The beta's voice came back strained and crackling. "Alpha, they're inside the inner bailey. It's not an army, it's a cadre of assassins. They scaled the east wall in the rain. They're heading for the keep." "How many?" "A dozen, maybe more. They fight like shadows, Alpha, not wolf style. Something else." Theron's eyes met Elara's. "They are here for you." He strode to the window, peering down. "They will not take this tower easily. The stair is defensible." But even as he spoke, a different sound reached them, a low, rhythmic thudding from directly below their feet. Not from the staircase, from the tower itself. "What is that?" Elara whispered, clutching a now crying Kaelen to her. Theron's face went slack with realization. The old grain chute, from when this was a storage tower. It was sealed with stone, but stone can be broken. He moved like lightning, shoving the heavy table across the room to block the small flagstoned section of floor in the corner. "Get behind me, both of you." The thudding grew louder, more urgent. Then, with a crack of shattering mortar, a section of the floor gave way. Stones tumbled into darkness below, and a cloud of dust billowed up. From the hole emerged not a warrior, but a slender, hooded figure, then another. They moved with unnerving silence, their faces obscured by black cloth, only their eyes visible, cold and empty. In their hands were not swords, but strange curved blades and coils of thin, strong rope. Theron met the first one with a roar, his sword a blur of steel. He cut the assassin down before they could fully clear the hole. But a second was already through, and a third. They did not engage Theron directly. One threw a dagger not at the Alpha, but at Elara. Theron intercepted it with his blade, the force knocking it aside. In that split second of distraction, the other two lunged not to kill, but to bind. They threw their ropes, aiming to entangle Theron's sword arm. They were not trying to defeat the Alpha King. They were trying to delay him. A fourth figure rose from the hole. This one was taller, their bearing different. They ignored Theron completely and strode towards Elara. "Stop," Elara cried, the command bursting from her in a wave of panic. The air shimmered. The tall assassins stumbled, clutching their head with a hissed curse, but they shook it off faster than the rogue wolf had. They wore something on their ears, small dark plugs. "Your song is weak, daughter. Your blood is not yet awake." Elara backed away, putting her body between the assassin and Kaelen. The golden heat in her chest flared, but it was chaotic, unfocused. She didn't know how to use it. The assassin drew a blade that glowed with a faint, sickly green light. "Come quietly. The boy lives. Fight, and he dies before your eyes." Theron, entangled in the ropes, roared in pure animal fury. He tore one arm free, snapping the rope, and beheaded one of his attackers, but the assassin was already within arm's reach of Elara. "No!" Kaelen screamed. It was the same powerful protective cry he'd used in the hall. The sound hit the assassin like a physical wave. They staggered, the plugs in their ears seeming to offer less protection against the raw, familial power in the boy's voice. It was the opening Elara needed, not with power, but with instinct. She grabbed the heavy iron candlestick from the table and swung it with all her might. It connected with the assassin's wrist. There was a crack, and the glowing blade clattered to the floor. The assassin snarled, backhanding her with shocking strength. Elara fell, seeing stars, Kaelen's scream echoing in her ears.
Then Theron was there, free of his bonds, painted with the blood of his foes. He placed himself between the assassin and his family. "You will touch no one in this tower," he vowed, his voice the finality of a tomb door closing. The tall assassin eyed the raging Alpha, the disarmed blade, and the defiant woman scrambling to hold her son. They made a decision. With a fluid motion, they threw a small glass orb at the floor. It shattered, releasing a cloud of thick, acrid smoke that burned the eyes and throat. Coughing, blinded, Theron swept his sword in an arc to protect the space around him. When the smoke cleared, the hole in the floor was empty. The remaining assassins were gone, leaving only their dead behind. Silence returned, broken by Kaelen's sobs and Elara's ragged breathing. Theron knelt beside her, his hands cupping her face, checking for injury. "Are you hurt? Look at me." "I am well," she choked out, pulling Kaelen into a tight embrace. They knew about my power. They called me daughter." Theron examined one of the dead assassins, pulling down the mask. The face was nondescript, human, but on the inside of the wrist was the same Eclipse brand. He picked up the fallen green glowing blade carefully with a cloth. The metal was icy to the touch, humming with a foul energy. "Wolf iron," he muttered, "forged to poison our kind, and these—" he plucked the small, dark plugs from another's ears. "Wax and bloodroot, to mute a siren's call or a moon daughter's command." He looked at Elara, the reality settling upon them both like a physical weight. The legends were true, the order of the eclipse was real, and Elara was the key to their apocalyptic prophecy. "We cannot stay here," Theron said, his mind racing. "They know this location. They will come again with greater numbers, different tactics." "Where can we go?" Elara asked, despair creeping into her voice. "If they are everywhere." "Not everywhere," Theron said, a dangerous plan forming in his eyes. "There is a place even the Eclipse would fear to tread, the lands of the Ironwood clan." Alaric, who had arrived with guards in the aftermath, paled. Theron, no. The Ironwoods are isolationists. They own no allegiance. Their Alpha Boren is a brute. He would sooner slit our throats than offer shelter. Boren owes me a blood debt, Theron said grimly, from the war at the Fever River. He swore an oath. He may be a brute, but he holds his oaths sacred. It is the one point of honor in his life of ruthlessness. We will be safe there, but we will not be welcome. You must stay close, speak to no one, and never, ever be alone. Elara nodded, pulling her cloak tighter. I am sorry for bringing this upon you, upon Kaelen. Theron's head snapped up, his eyes catching the firelight. Do not ever apologize. This was set in motion long before you scrubbed a floor in my hall. You are not the cause of this storm, Elara. You are its eye. He leaned forward, his intensity magnetic. And I would rather be in the eye of the storm with you than safe in a calm harbor without you. The words hung in the smoky air, more intimate than any touch. Elara felt her breath still. The man before her was not just a king protecting an asset. He was a man laying bare a truth he was only beginning to understand himself. Before she could form a reply, a low whistle came from the cave entrance, Evander's signal. Theron was on his feet in an instant, his sword silently drawn. Elara gathered Kaelen, her heart hammering. Evander slipped inside, his face grave. Riders, a league behind us on the road, moving fast and with purpose, not pack cavalry. Their formation is all wrong. Eclipse? Theron whispered. Or mercenaries in their pay. We cannot outrun mounted men on foot, not with the child. Theron's mind worked, his gaze darting around the cave. Then we do not run. We vanish. He pointed to the back of the cave, where a trickle of water ran down the wall. There, an old stream channel. It narrows, but it may lead to the bluffs overlooking the river. It is dangerous, but it is not a path for horses. It was a desperate gamble. They doused the fire, scattering the ashes, and squeezed into the dank, narrow crevice at the rear of the cave. It was a tight, claustrophobic passage, the rock slick and cold. Kaelen whimpered in fear, and Elara sang to him softly, her voice echoing strangely in the stone throat. They emerged, cold and wet, onto a rocky ledge high above a rushing, swollen river. The road was far below and behind them. They could see the pinpricks of torchlight where their pursuers had found their abandoned camp. We follow the river north, Theron decided. It will throw off our scent and lead us toward the Ironwood borders. The next 2 days were a test of endurance. They slept in thickets, ate cold rations, and waded through icy streams to hide their trail. Kaelen bore it with a quiet resilience that broke Elara's heart. Theron was a constant, watchful presence, his hand always near his weapon, his body always positioned between them and the perceived threat. On the 3rd day, they reached the edge of the Ironwood. It was like stepping into another world. The tall, straight pines of Thornheart gave way to monstrous, ancient oaks and yews, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes, their trunks covered in thick, gray moss. The light faded to a perpetual green-tinged twilight. The very air felt still and watchful. "We are being observed," Evander murmured, his hand on his axe. "Let them look," Theron said, squaring his shoulders. He stepped forward and let out a low, powerful howl, not a challenge, but a formal request for parley, stating his name and his blood debt. The response was silence. Then, from the shadows between the colossal trees, figures emerged. They were wolves, but unlike any Elara had seen. They were shorter, thicker, with coarse fur the color of bark and stone. Their eyes held no welcome, only a cold, assessing intelligence. They did not shift, remaining in their wolf forms, a silent, encircling guard. One, larger than the rest, with a scar across his muzzle, shifted. He was a man of middle years, built like a barrel, with a beard woven with bones, and a face that seemed carved from granite. "Thornheart," the man grunted, "you call of old debts in my woods."
Boren, Theron replied, dipping his head slightly, a gesture of respect between alphas. I call upon the oath sworn at Fever River. I seek sanctuary for myself, my heir, and my companion. We are pursued by a shadow that threatens all packs. Boren's small dark eyes flicked over Theron, then to Elara clutching Kaelen, then to Evander. His gaze lingered on Elara the longest, a faint, unrecognizable flicker in their depths. The debt is mine, Boren said, his voice like grinding stones. Sanctuary you shall have, for 3 days, no more. My woods are not hiding holes for every king with enemies. He turned. Follow. Do not stray from the path. The deep does not forgive trespass. They were led along a barely visible track deeper into the oppressive gloom. The ironwood wolves flanked them, a living wall of silent hostility. They came to a village unlike Stonehaven. It was built not of stone, but of the living trees themselves, with platforms and dwellings woven into the massive branches, connected by rope bridges. Fires glowed in iron baskets, casting long, dancing shadows. They were given a hut, a single round room built around the trunk of an ancient oak. It was crude, but dry and secure. Once alone, Theron turned to Elara. We have 3 days. 3 days to rest, to plan our next move, and to understand what the eclipse truly wants with you. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the touch firm and warm through her damp clothes. We will use this time. We will train. Train? Asked Elara, confused. Your power, Theron said, his eyes holding hers. It saved us in the woods. It faltered in the tower. It is a weapon you do not know how to wield, and in this fight, an untrained weapon is as dangerous to its holder as to the enemy. Starting tomorrow, you will learn to command it. Elara looked at Kaelen, already exploring the curious hut, and then back at Theron. This fierce, complicated king who was offering not just shelter, but strength. The journey here had stripped away the last vestiges of their formal arrangement. What was growing between them was raw, real, and forged in shared danger. She nodded. Teach me. Chapter 8. Whispers in the Deep. The ironwood deep was a realm of perpetual twilight and watchful silence. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, carried no birdsong, only the occasional creak of ancient boughs. Their hut, woven into the heart of a great oak, felt less like a shelter and more like a cage suspended in a green-tinted dream. True to his word, Theron began Elara's training at first light. They ventured to a small, mossy clearing a short distance from the village, where a single shaft of wan sunlight pierced the canopy. Evander stayed with Kaelen, telling him stories of warrior heroes. The power you used, Theron began, standing before her, his arms crossed. It is not magic. It is will. It is the primal authority of the wolf, but in its purest, most ancient form. Most alphas command through strength and dominance. What you did, it was persuasion, a command so fundamental the wolf's spirit has no choice but to obey. Elara clasped her arms around her. I don't know how I did it. It just came. From here. She placed a hand over her chest. Then we start there, Theron said. Close your eyes. Listen to your own wolf, not to the fear, not to the thoughts, to the instinct beneath. Elara obeyed, closing her eyes. She listened to the forest sounds, to her own breathing. She searched for the quiet, timid presence she had always known as her wolf. But now, beneath the familiar shyness, she sensed something else, a deep, humming warmth, like a slumbering star. It was the golden heat from the woods, the same force that had shimmered in the tower. I feel it, she whispered. Good. Now imagine it is a sound, not a word, but a tone of pure intention. Your intention is stillness. You wish the forest around you to be still. Do not shout it. Hum it from that place.
Elara focused, trying to shape the warmth into a single, clear note of command for peace. She imagined the rustling leaves falling silent. She pushed. Nothing happened. The breeze still stirred the moss. Frustration bubbled up. "It is not working." "You are trying to force it," Theron said, his voice surprisingly patient. "You are Elara, the maid, trying to command the world. You must let her speak, the one inside, the moon's daughter." The title sent a shiver through her. "I do not know who she is." "Then stop trying to know," Theron said, stepping closer. His presence was a steady anchor in her whirling thoughts. "Just allow. You are not giving an order to an underling. You are reminding the world of a truth it has forgotten. Try again." Elara took a deep breath. She let go of the effort, of the fear of failure. She simply sank into the humming warmth and invited it. She didn't push a command. She offered a feeling, a deep, resonant peace.
A gentle wave of energy, invisible but palpable, rippled out from her. It wasn't the violent shimmer from before. It was soft, like a sigh. In the clearing, every small movement ceased. The leaves on the bushes stopped trembling. A beetle climbing a blade of grass froze in place. The very air seemed to hold its breath. The silence was profound, reverent. Elara opened her eyes, awestruck. Theron was staring at her, his winter eyes wide with something like wonder. "It is beautiful," he breathed. And then, as she released the feeling, the forest exhaled. The leaves rustled. The beetle continued its climb. The world returned to normal. "You did it," Theron said, a genuine, unguarded smile touching his lips. It transformed his stern face, making him look younger, lighter. Elara's heart gave a strange, pleasant lurch. "It was so small," she said. "A pebble creates ripples across a lake," he replied. "We will build on this. Control, not just eruption." Their lessons became the rhythm of their days. In the clearing, Theron taught her to focus her will, to direct it with precision. He had her practice on small creatures, a bird, a squirrel, guiding them with gentle nudges of command to hop from one branch to another. It was exhausting mental work that left her head aching, but her spirit strangely energized. In the evenings, back in the oak hut, a different tension grew. The space was small, intimate. They shared meals of the ironwood simple fare, hearty stews and dense bread. They spoke of small things, Kaelen's progress with his wooden sword, a curious flower she had seen, an old tale Theron remembered from his youth. The pretense was gone. They were a man and a woman, bound by extraordinary circumstance, discovering each other in the quiet moments. One night, after Kaelen had slept, they sat by the small fire pit in the center of the hut. Theron was sharpening his dagger, the rhythmic shink-shink of stone on steel a companionable sound. "You never speak of your childhood," Elara ventured softly, mending a tear in Kaelen's tunic. Theron's hand stilled for a moment. "There is little to tell that is not about duty. My father was a hard man, a great alpha, but hard. Love was a luxury, strategy a necessity. Seraphina, she was part of a strategic alliance. The love came later, a gift I did not expect." He looked into the flames. "Kaelen's childhood has been shadows and silence. I swore he would not have a life like mine. And yet I have given him worse. You have given him a kingdom, and now you are fighting to give him a safe one." "I am fighting," Theron said, his gaze lifting to meet hers, "to give him a mother." The words hung in the fire-lit air, more profound than any declaration. Elara's needle paused. She saw the truth in his eyes, not just a need for a caretaker,
but a recognition of what she had become to his son, and the dawning, terrifying hope of what she could become to him. "Theron, I—" A branch snapped outside the hut. Both froze. Theron was on his feet in an instant, dagger in hand, motioning for Elara to get behind him. The peaceful intimacy shattered, replaced by the old, familiar dread. But it was not an assassin. The hide covering the doorway was pushed aside, and Boren ducked into the hut. He filled the space, his expression unreadable. Thornheart, a word, outside. Theron gave Elara a warning look and followed the ironwood Alpha out into the deep gloom. Elara waited, her heart thudding. She crept to the doorway, listening. "Not just passing hunters," Boren's gruff voice carried. "Men asking questions in the villages at the edge of the woods, showing bold, looking for a noblewoman with a child and a tall, dark-haired guardian. They smell of southern steel and false smiles." "The eclipse," Theron's voice was tight. "They are closing the net." "Your 3 days are up at dawn," Boren stated. "My debt is paid. You will be gone." "Boren, they are not just my enemies. If they find what they seek, no pack will be safe, not even your deep." A low growl. "Do not preach doom to me in my woods, Thornheart. My wolves are the woods. Let their southern shadows come. They will feed the trees." There was a pause. But the girl, the quiet one with the strange eyes. Alana's breath caught. "What of her?" Theron's voice was dangerously calm. "My seer," Boren said, the word sounding strange in his rough mouth. "An old wolf who reads the moss and the mist. She says the girl carries an old light, a moonlight that burns. She says a storm follows her, not of her making, but for her claiming. You travel with a beacon, and beacons draw more than moths. They draw hunters with sharp teeth." "I know what she is," Theron said, his voice low, "and I will protect her with my life." "See that you do," Boren grunted. "Dawn, you are gone. I will give you a guide to the northern pass. It is treacherous, but it will lead you into the high crags, nowhere land. Perhaps your shadows will lose your scent in the stone." Theron re-entered the hut, his face set in grim lines. He relayed the conversation to Elara in terse sentences. "So we run again?" she said, the weariness seeping into her bones. "No," Theron said, a new resolute hardening his features. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. They were warm and calloused. "We turn south, not to Stonehaven, but to the source." "The source?" "The Order of the Eclipse believes you are their moon's daughter. They base this on legends, on bloodlines. Alaric's books spoke of an ancient place, a temple to the moon goddess from before the first pacts. It is said to hold the records of the original lines. If we can find it, perhaps we can learn the truth, why they want you, how to stop them. We take the fight from defense to knowledge." It was a desperate, dangerous plan, to seek out the heart of the mystery instead of fleeing from it. "Where is this temple?" Elara asked. "In the Whispering Mountains," Theron said, "a range so old they say the stones remember the goddess's footsteps. It is a journey of weeks, through hostile lands." Elara looked at Kaelen sleeping peacefully, then at Theron's determined face. She thought of the power humming in her chest, a power she was only beginning to understand. Running had brought them here, to another temporary shelter. Perhaps it was time to walk a different path. "Then we go to the mountains," she said, her voice firm. "We find the truth, together." Theron's grip on her hands tightened, and in his eyes she saw not just a king's resolve, but a partner's fierce pride.
The bond between them, forged in fear and tenderness, solidified into something unbreakable, a shared purpose.
Dawn in the ironwood deep was a mere lightening of the gloom. Boren was as good as his word. A silent, grim-faced guide awaited them, a wolf who never shifted to human form, communicating only with gestures and low chuffs. He led them not back the way they came, but northward, onto a path that quickly became a steep, rocky scramble up the side of a mountain. This was the Northern Pass. It was less a path and more a suggestion of one, a treacherous route of loose shale, sheer drops, and biting wind that howled through the stone teeth of the crags. Their ironwood guide moved with uncanny grace, never looking back to see if they followed. Kaelen had to be carried most of the way, bundled against Theron's chest. Elara focused on placing one foot in front of the other, her muscles burning, her breath coming in ragged gasps in the thin air. The world narrowed to the next handhold, the next narrow ledge. They climbed for hours, leaving the green prison of the deep far below, entering a realm of gray rock and endless sky. The sun was a cold, hard coin in the pale blue. Just as Elara thought her legs would give out, their guide stopped at a windswept plateau. Ahead, the mountain range sprawled like a giant's broken spine, the Whispering Mountains. The ironwood wolf gave a final, dismissive chuff toward the distant peaks and then turned, melting back down the path the way they had come, abandoning them to the desolate heights. "Charming hospitality," Evander muttered, rubbing his sore shoulders. Fearsome set Kaelen down, the boy immediately clinging to Elara's legs. "We rest here briefly, then we descend into the foothills. The old temple is said to be in a hidden valley, a place called Moonfall Glen. Alaric's notes were vague. We will have to search." The descent was easier on the lungs but harder on the knees. They made camp that night in a shallow cave, huddled around a meager fire of scrub brush. The silence here was different from the deep, a vast, empty silence that seemed to swallow sound. "Tell me of the temple," Elara asked Theron, more to fill the void than anything. Theron fed a twig to the fire. "The legends say it was not built by wolves, but by the goddess herself for the first of our kind, a place of learning and communion. When the packs spread and wars began, it was abandoned, forgotten. Its location became a secret, then a myth. Alaric only found references to it in a crumbling scroll traded from a traveling scholar. It spoke of the daughter's return and the unsealing of the lunar well. Prophetic nonsense, perhaps, but it is the only thread we have." "A lunar well?" Elara repeated, the words stirring something deep in her memory, not her own, but a whisper from the warm power within her. "The scroll was damaged, that is all it said." Theron looked at her, his face etched with concern in the firelight. "Does it mean something to you?" Elara closed her eyes, reaching for the humming warmth. Lunar well. The words resonated, like a key touching a lock. A faint image flashed behind her eyes, not of stone, but of shimmering, liquid silver, pulsing with a soft light. She gasped, opening her eyes. I saw something. Water, but not water. Light made liquid." Theron and Evander exchanged a glance. "A vision?" Evander asked, his superstitious side showing. "A memory," Elara whispered, certain of it. "Not mine, hers. The one inside." She looked at Theron, a new determination crystallizing. "I think I can find it. Not the temple, but the well. I think it's calling me." The next week was a journey through a stark, beautiful, and unforgiving landscape. They followed riverbeds that were mostly stone, crossed high meadows dotted with hardy purple flowers, and skirted the territories of lone territorial mountain wolves who watched them from high ridges with cold suspicion. Elara led, not with maps but with intuition. She would pause, close her eyes, and listen to the hum in her chest. It grew stronger when they traveled in one direction, fainter in another. It was like following a thread of moonlight only she could see. Theron trusted her guidance without question, a faith that humbled and terrified her. One afternoon, the thread pulled them off the animal trail they had been following into a narrow, seemingly dead-end canyon. The walls rose sheer on either side, streaked with mineral veins that glittered in the sun. "This is a box canyon," Evander said with skepticism. "There is no way out." "The thread is strong here," Elara insisted, walking toward the blank rock face at the end. As she approached, the humming in her chest became a gentle vibration, a pleasant thrum that spread to her bones. The blank wall of rock wasn't blank. As she focused, she saw faint ancient carvings eroded with wind and time, phases of the moon, running wolves, a single large eye. "There is a door," she breathed. Theron came up beside her, running his fingers over the carvings. "Hidden by more than stone, by glamour, old magic." He looked at her. "Can you open it?" Elara placed her palms flat against the cold stone. She didn't push, she didn't command, she simply opened herself to the humming warmth and offered it to the carvings, a greeting, a recognition. The stone under her palms grew warm. The ancient carvings began to glow with a soft silver light. With a deep grinding sound that had not been heard in millennia, a section of the rock wall, perfectly camouflaged, sank inward and then slid sideways, revealing a dark passage smelling of cool, damp air and age. They stood in awe before the revealed entrance, a maw into the heart of the mountain. Kaelen squeezed Ilara's hand, his eyes huge. "Mama go in dark?" Elara knelt, brushing his hair. "We must, my heart, to find answers." Theron lit a torch from his tinderbox. The flame danced, reflecting in his resolute eyes. "Stay close. Evander, the rear. Whatever's in there, it has been waiting a long time." They stepped into the darkness. The passage was narrow, hewn from the living rock. The air grew colder, and the sound of dripping water echoed around them. The torchlight revealed more carvings on the walls, depicting scenes of wolves communing with celestial bodies, of a great well overflowing with light, of a single female figure surrounded by a radiant aura. "The moon's daughter," Theron murmured, tracing the figure with his eyes. The passage opened suddenly into a vast, breathtaking cavern. It was not dark. Light emanated from the very walls, veins of crystal that pulsed with a soft internal luminescence, casting the chamber in shades of blue and silver. In the center of the cavern was the source of the vision, the lunar well. It was a natural spring, but its waters were not clear. They were a shifting, swirling liquid silver, glowing from within, casting dancing light on the high crystal-studded ceiling. The air thrummed with a peaceful, immense power. It was the source of the hum in Ilara's chest, magnified 1,000-fold. At the far end of the cavern, on a dais of white stone, sat a simple stone altar. Upon it rested a single, thick tome bound in what looked like pale leather, and beside it, a crescent-shaped pendant made of the same glowing crystal as the walls. Elara felt drawn to the well as if by a physical string. She walked toward it, Theron and others following slowly, reverently. At the edge of the silver pool, she knelt. The power here was not intimidating, it was welcoming, like returning home after a long, weary journey. She reached out a hand, daring to touch the glowing water. The moment her fingers broke the surface, the entire cavern blazed with light. Images, sounds, emotions flooded her mind, not as a violent assault, but as a gentle infusion of knowledge. She saw the first wolves bathed in the light of this well, receiving their gifts from the goddess. She saw the division of the lines, the alphas for strength and leadership, the betas for loyalty and support, the omegas for healing and unity, and she saw one line, the first line, the prime line, gifted not with a role, but with the essence of the goddess's own authority, the power to connect, to command harmony, to be the living bridge between wolf and moon, the Selines. And she saw the betrayal. A faction, fearing this unifying power, believing it made the other lines subservient, they turned on the Celenes. They hunted them, bound their power with wolf's bane and dark rituals, scattered them, erased their history. They called themselves the Order of the Eclipse, their goal to forever suppress the moon's light, leaving only the harsh, unyielding law of tooth and claw. The last clear image was of a woman, her eyes the same vibrant violet as Elara's, hiding a newborn babe in a humble cottage, whispering a blessing and a binding spell before fleeing into the night, tears on her cheeks. The light in the cavern softened. Elara withdrew her hand, dripping silver, her body trembling with the weight of inherited memory. Tears streamed down her face. "I know," she whispered, her voice echoing. "I know who I am. I know what they want." She turned to Theron, her violet eyes now holding the ancient sorrow and wisdom of her bloodline. "They want to finish what they started. They want to drown the last light of the moon in my blood. And they will use Kaelen, use you, use everything I love to do it." Theron stood before her, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to the living legacy of his goddess. He saw the pain, the burden, the immense power in her slight frame. He dropped to one knee before her, there at the edge of the sacred well. "Then they will fail," he vowed, his voice unwavering in the hallowed silence. "For your light is not yours alone anymore. It is mine to defend. It is Kaelen's future. It is the truth this world has been bleeding for. You are not a weapon to be used, Elara of the Selene. You are a queen to be crowned, and I will spend my last breath ensuring you take your rightful place." In the glow of the lunar well, amidst the echoes of ancient truths, the last barriers between Alpha and Omega, king and servant, shattered. What remained was a bond deeper than fate, forged in shared destiny, and a love that had grown in the darkest of soils, now blooming in the oldest of lights. Chapter 10. The Tome and the Trial. The silence in the cavern was no longer empty, but full, pregnant with the weight of revealed history. The glowing waters of the lunar well settled back into their gentle, swirling rhythm, the burst of transmitted memory complete. Elara remained on her knees by the pool, her fingers still tingling where the silver liquid had touched her. The knowledge was not just in her mind, it was woven into her bones, a tapestry of loss and purpose. She was the last daughter of the Selene line. The eclipse had hunted her ancestors to near extinction, and now they had found the final spark. Theron's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a solid, grounding weight. "Can you stand?" She nodded, using his strength to rise. Her legs felt unsteady, but her resolve was iron. She looked toward the dais and the ancient tome. Together they approached it. The book was enormous, its cover made of a strange pearlescent hide that seemed to shift colors in the crystal light. Theron lifted it carefully. It was lighter than it looked. He opened it on the altar. The pages were not of parchment, but of thin, polished stone, inscribed with flowing, elegant script that glowed faintly. Alaric would have wept to see it. It was a history, a genealogy, and a grimoire of the Selene lineage. Elara traced a finger over a page that depicted the binding ritual used to suppress their power, the very poison Alaric had found in her blood. "My mother, or grandmother, she did this to me, to hide me." "To save you," Theron corrected gently, reading another passage. "It says here the binding is keyed to a trigger, a moment of extreme peril for the bearer, or a direct command from a blood relative. The attack in the woods, it was the peril that began the crack. In the tower, when Kaelen screamed for you, his blood, his love, was the key that turned the lock further." "So my power was meant to protect him," Elara whispered, looking over at Kaelen, who was sitting quietly with Evander, wide-eyed at the glowing cave. "And to lead you here," Theron said, turning pages. He stopped at a diagram of the Kemple complex. This is not just one cavern. These are catacombs, libraries, living quarters, a whole sanctuary. And here, he pointed to a symbol deep within the schematic, the heart chamber. It is said to hold the crown of the moon, a focus for the Selene's power. Elara's eyes fell on the crescent pendant beside the book. It hummed in harmony with her own core. She picked it up. It was warm, and as it touched her skin, the crystal at its center flared, matching the rhythm of the well. A sense of rightness, of completeness settled over her. "We are not safe here for long," Evander said, his practical voice cutting through the wonder. "If the eclipse could track us to the ironwood, they may find this place. This beacon of power cannot be subtle." "He's right," Theron said, closing the tome with reverence. "We take what we need and go. The book, the pendant. We find this heart chamber. If there is a weapon or a tool there that can help us, we must have it." Following the map in the book, they discovered a hidden archway behind the altar, leading deeper into the mountain. These passages were not natural. They were beautifully carved, the walls inlaid with more glowing crystal. They passed empty rooms that might have been studies, their stone shelves dust-free due to some ancient preservation charm.
The sense of walking through a ghostly home was overwhelming. Elara felt whispers of long-faded joy, of scholarly debate, of peaceful nights under a stone sky. This had been a place of light and learning, torn apart by fear and hatred. Finally, they stood before a door unlike the others. It was made of a dark metallic substance, etched with a complex pattern of interlocking circles and crescent moons. In its center was a shallow indentation, exactly the shape of the pendant Elara wore. "This is it," Theron said. Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding. She placed the pendant into the indentation. It fit perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the metal grew warm. The etched lines began to glow with a fierce blue-white light. The door emitted a deep, resonant thrum and then split down the middle, the two halves sliding silently into the walls. The heart chamber took their breath away. It was smaller than the well cavern, but more ornate. The entire dome of the ceiling was a mosaic of the night sky, the stars rendered with chips of crystal that glittered. In the center of the room, on a pedestal of pure white quartz, sat a circlet. It was not a crown of gold and jewels, but of woven moonlight. At least, that's what it looked like. Strands of solidified silver light, delicate and ethereal, forming a simple, beautiful band. Hovering above it, unsupported, was a smooth, egg-sized moonstone that pulsed with a soft, radiant glow. "The crown of the moon," Elara breathed, drawn toward it. "Wait," Theron cautioned, but it was too late. As Elara approached the pedestal, the chamber came alive. The star mosaic on the ceiling brightened. From the walls, 4 figures seemed to step forth, not flesh, but constructs of light and crystal, shaped like armored warriors. They held spears of solid light and moved to block her path to the crown. A trial, Theron realized, drawing his sword. The blade looked mundane and useless against these beings of pure energy. The foremost light guardian leveled its spear at Elara and spoke in a voice like chiming stones. "Who seeks the crown?" Elara straightened her shoulders. "I am Elara, daughter of the Selene, the last of my line. Blood alone is not enough. The crown is for the worthy. Prove your worth, daughter of the moon. Command us." It was a test of her power, but not of brute force. She looked at the guardians, at their poised, waiting stances. They were not enemies, they were reflections. She remembered her lessons with Theron. Control, not force. Persuasion, not domination. She closed her eyes, finding the humming core of her power. But instead of shaping a command, she shaped a question,
an offering. She projected not authority, but purpose. She showed them her memory of Kaelen's smile, of Theron's steadfast protection, of the burning village in her vision where the Selines had fallen. She showed them her fear, her love, her resolve to protect, not to conquer. She showed them she wanted the crown not for power, but for peace. She showed them she wanted the crown not for power, but for peace. The warmth flowed from her, a wave of silver light that washed over the crystal guardians. They did not lower their spears, they stood straighter. In unison, they slammed the butts of their light spears on the floor. The chime resonated through the chamber. The heart is true, the purpose is pure, the crown accepts its keeper. The guardians dissolved back into motes of light that swirled upward to join the stars on the ceiling. The path was clear. Trembling, Elara stepped to the pedestal. The circlet of moonlight seemed to sense her. It rose of its own accord, floating gently to rest upon her brow. The moment it touched her skin, a shock of pure, cool energy coursed through her. It did not hurt. It was like drinking clear, ice-cold water after a long thirst. The hovering moonstone descended, settling into the center of the circlet, where it glowed with a steady, serene light. Knowledge flooded her again, but this was different. Not history, but understanding. She understood the scope of her power now. She could calm frenzied mobs, heal rifts between packs, reveal truth where there was lies. She could, if she chose, command the allegiance of any wolf who still held the goddess's spark in their soul. She was a unifier, a healer of the wolf spirit. She turned to Theron, the crown gleaming on her brow, her violet eyes now holding the depth of the cosmos. "I know what to do," she said, her voice echoing with a new, gentle authority. Theron looked at her, her queen crowned not by him, but by the ancient heart of their world. He saw not a weapon, but a sanctuary. He knelt once more, not out of obligation, but out of awe. "Then lead us, my Luna." The word hung in the air. Luna, not by contract, not by pretense, by divine right and earned respect. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. From the tunnels behind them, a new sound echoed, not the chime of crystal, but the scrape of boots on stone and the clatter of weapons. Evander, standing guard at the chamber entrance, turned, his face pale. "Alpha, they're here, in the tunnels." The eclipse had found them, and they were no longer just hunters in the shadows. Streaming into the glowing chamber were a dozen armed men led by a figure Elara recognized from her vision, a tall man with cold gray eyes and hair the color of ashes. He wore a dark robe emblazoned with the eclipsed circle. He smiled, a thin, cruel curve of his lips, as his eyes landed on Elara, crowned and radiant. "Ah," he said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey, "the prodigal daughter returns home, and she has dressed for the occasion. How thoughtful! It will make the sacrifice all the more potent." His gaze shifted to Kaelen, hidden behind Evander. "And you brought the whelp. Excellent. The old blood and the new heir. The eclipse will be complete tonight." They were trapped in the heart chamber, the crown newly won, with the enemy at the door. The trial of worth was over. The trial of survival had just begun. Chapter 11. Heart of Stone, Heart of Fire. The cruel smile of the Eclipse leader, a man who introduced himself as Lord Cyric, was a stark slash in the serene glow of the heart chamber. His gray eyes held no fanaticism, only a chilling, calculated greed. This was not a holy war for him, it was a transaction of power. "You've saved us the trouble of dredging the mountains," Cyric said, his men fanning out to block the only exit. They were a mix of hardened human mercenaries and a few shifters whose eyes held the dull sheen of the compelled or the bought. The last Celine and the Thornheart heir, a 2-for-1 prize. My masters will be pleased. Theron moved like liquid shadow, placing himself directly between Cyric and Elara, his sword in his hand, his body a wall of tense muscle. Evander had drawn Kaelen behind him, a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. The room that moments before had been a site of sacred revelation was now a killing floor.
"You will touch neither," Theron growled, his alpha aura flaring, a physical pressure that made the torches of the Eclipse men gutter. "This is a place of the goddess. Your profane feet defile it." Cyric chuckled, unimpressed. "The goddess abandoned this place ages ago, Thornheart. All that remains is a reservoir of power, waiting for a stronger will to claim it." His gaze slid past Theron, fixing on Elara. "And that crown on your head, girl, is the faucet. You will hand it over, along with your blood, and the boy, or we will take them from your corpse. The method matters little to the ritual." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, but the crown on her brow felt cool, a focus for the storm inside her. The flood of knowledge had receded, leaving behind a crystalline clarity. She understood her power now, not as a weapon, but as a song of unity, of peace. But even a lullaby could be sung with force. She stepped forward, not around Theron, but to stand beside him. The moonstone in her circlet pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "This power was never meant to be claimed," she said, her voice echoing with the new authority, yet still her own. "It was meant to be shared, to remind wolves of the bond we have with each other and with the moon that birthed us. You seek to eclipse that light. You will only cast the world into a darker shadow." "Pretty words from a pretty vessel," Cyric sneered, "but the time for parley is over. Take her, alive. Kill the others." The Eclipse shifters surged forward. Chaos erupted. Theron met the first wave with a roar, his sword a blur of deadly efficiency. He fought not to kill, but to maim and disable, creating a barrier of pain between the enemy and his family. Evander, with a short sword in one hand and a dagger in the other, defended the corner where Kaelen crouched, his movements economical and brutal. But they were outnumbered 3-1 in a confined space. An Eclipse shifter, a hulking brute with claws extended, lunged for Theron's flank. Theron parried a sword thrust from a human, leaving himself open. "Halt!" Alara's command tore from her, amplified by the crown. It wasn't the gentle persuasion from the clearing, it was a clarion call of pure, undeniable will, shaped by the dire need to protect. A wave of visible silver energy, like a ripple on a moonlit pond, exploded from her. Every wolf in the room, Theron, Evander, the Eclipse shifters, staggered as if struck. The command was absolute, their muscles locked, their wills subsumed by a higher authority. The human mercenaries, unaffected by the wolf-specific command, hesitated, confused by their allies' sudden paralysis. But Cyric, to Alara's horror, only flinched. He wore a medallion under his robes that glowed with a sickly yellow light, countering her power. "A noble effort, daughter," he said, drawing a wickedly curved dagger made of the same green wolf iron. He moved not toward her, but with terrifying speed towards the real target, Kaelen, who was wide-eyed and frozen behind the momentarily stalled Evander. "No!" The scream was ripped from both Theron and Elara at once. Theron broke through the fading edges of her command through sheer force of love and panic. He threw his body in a desperate tackle, crashing into Cyric just as the dagger began its descent. They fell in a tangle of limbs, the wolf iron blade skittering across the stone floor. The impact broke her concentration. The silver wave dissipated. The eclipse shifters shook off the compulsion with snarls, and the fight reignited with renewed fury. She saw Theron and Cyric wrestling on the ground, a knife appearing in Cyric's hand, a simple steel one this time. She saw an eclipse soldier raising his sword over a still disoriented Evander. She saw another reaching for Kaelen. Fear threatened to drown her, but beneath the fear the crown hummed and the lessons in the clearing returned. Control, precision, not a shout, but a directed whisper. She didn't try to command the room. She focused on the single soldier about to grab her son. She shaped her will into a needle, not a hammer. She poured into it not just command, but the primal protective fury of a mother. You will not touch him. The thought hit the soldier like a physical blow to the mind. He cried out, clutching his head, dropping his weapon, stumbling back as if burned. It was a targeted, brutal use of her gift, and it left her breathless, a sharp pain behind her eyes. But it worked. Theron gained the upper hand, pinning Cyric and smashing his fist into the man's face. Cyric went limp. Theron surged to his feet, grabbing the fallen wolf-iron dagger. He didn't hesitate. He turned the enemy's poison against them. "Evander, the shifters, their weakness," he yelled, tossing the green blade to his beta. Evander caught it, understanding dawning. He abandoned his sword and fought with the dagger, its merest scratch causing the eclipse shifters to convulse and howl in agony, their own wolves turning against them from within. The tide turned. With their leader down and their allied shifters falling to the wolf-iron, the human mercenaries' morale broke. They began to back towards the tunnel, their will to fight evaporating. Theron stood panting in the center of the chamber, blood dripping from a cut on his brow, his eyes wild. "Elara? Kaelen?" he asked. "We are here," Elara said, pulling Kaelen into a fierce hug. The boy was trembling but unhurt. Evander stood guard over the unconscious Cyric and the moaning shifters. "What now, Alpha? We are still deep in enemy territory." Theron looked at Elara, at the crown shining on her brow, at the resolve in her violet eyes. He looked at the ancient tome they had left by the altar outside. A plan, desperate and bold, formed in his mind. "We don't run," he echoed their decision in the ironwood. "We use their own scheme against them." He pointed to Cyric. "He said his masters would be pleased. That means he reports to someone higher. We make him report. We let the eclipse believe they have won." Elara understood instantly. "A trap. We let them take us to their heart." "It is the only way to end this," Theron said, his voice grim. "If we flee, they hunt us forever, and they will keep trying to take you and Kaelen. We must cut the head from the serpent, and to do that, we must enter the serpent's den." It was a terrifying gamble to voluntarily walk into the stronghold of their enemies. "They will be expecting prisoners," Evander said, practical as ever. "Not a crowned Selene and a ready Alpha." "Then we look the part," Theron said. He walked to Elara. "Can you dim your light? Make the crown seem inert. Make yourself seem bound." Elara touched the moonstone. She reached for the power, not to wield it, but to ask it to sleep, to hide. The crown's glow faded until it looked like a simple, if elegant, piece of silver and stone. The aura of power around her receded, tucked deep inside. She looked like a frightened girl again, albeit wearing a strange headpiece.
Theron took a length of rope from a fallen mercenary. He didn't tie her hands, but loosely looped the rope around her wrists, leaving it obvious she could slip free. He did the same for Evander. He kept Kaelen close, the boy instructed to play quiet and scared. "When Cyric wakes, Theron instructed. "He will find his prize seemingly secured, his men routed but his mission accomplished. His pride will demand he deliver us personally. We play our parts until we see the face of the master behind the eclipse." It was a performance for their lives. When Cyric groaned back to consciousness, he found Theron standing over him with his own wolf-iron dagger at his throat. Elara and Kaelen huddled with Evander, looking defeated. "You have a choice, Cyric," Theron lied, his voice cold. "You can die here in this hole, or you can take us to your master. I wish to bargain for the lives of my family." Cyric, his nose broken and his pride wounded, saw the bound captives and the determined but seemingly cornered Alpha. He saw a chance to salvage his mission and perhaps gain even greater favor. Greed won over sense. "Bargain?" Cyric spat blood. "You have nothing to bargain with, Thornheart. But my master does enjoy gloating. Very well, I will take you to the Eclipse Citadel. You can plead your case before the High Ascendant. He will enjoy that before he drains your mate and breaks your heir." He struggled to his feet, eyeing the dormant crown on Elara's head with avarice. "The girl and the crown come with me. You and your beta will be disarmed and bound for real." Under the watchful eyes of the remaining cowed mercenaries, Theron and Evander submitted to having their hands properly tied. Their real weapons were confiscated, though Theron managed to palm a small, sharp shard of the green wolf iron into his sleeve. Elara was pulled to Cyric's side, his hand vice-like on her arm. Kaelen was forced to walk beside a brutish guard. As they were marched out of the heart chamber, back through the glowing tunnels, Elara caught Theron's eye. His gaze was a promise, a silent vow that thrummed through the bond that had grown between them, stronger than any rope. They were walking into the lion's den, but they were not lambs to the slaughter. They were a king, a queen, a prince, and a loyal knight, entering the darkness together, a spark of moonlight ready to ignite a revolution. Chapter 12. The Eclipse Citadel. They traveled for days, a grim procession moving southeast out of the mountains and into a region of badlands, barren, rocky hills under a relentless sun. Cyric, his confidence returning with every mile from the temple, kept Elara close, his grip a constant, unpleasant reminder of their charade. Theron and Evander marched in the middle of the mercenary group, their faces set in stoic masks, but their eyes constantly scanning, memorizing routes, guard patterns, weaknesses. Kaelen was the greatest concern. The boy was exhausted and frightened, but he remembered his instructions, playing his part with a solemnity that broke Elara's heart. He didn't cry for her, he just watched Theron with wide, trusting eyes, drawing strength from his father's unwavering presence. On the third day, they reached it, the Eclipse Citadel. It was not a castle, but a monstrosity carved into the face of a colossal rust-colored mesa. Its architecture was sharp, angular, and oppressive, designed to block out the sun. Banners bearing the eclipsed circle hung listlessly in the dry wind. The air here felt dead, sucked dry of life and magic. Even the hum of power within Elara felt muffled, suppressed by the pervasive gloom of the place. They were marched through a giant gate of black iron and into a cavernous courtyard. Wolves in dark armor patrolled the walls, but these were not like any pack warriors. Their eyes were hollow, their movements synchronized and soulless. They had been broken and remade into perfect, unquestioning soldiers. Cyric led them into the heart of the mesa, through torch-lit halls that smelled of dust, iron, and something sweetly cloying, incense meant to mask a deeper rot. Finally, they were thrust into a large circular chamber with a domed ceiling. In the center of the room was a sunken area, like an inverted dais, and in the center of that stood a grotesque altar of black stone, veined with red. Above it, a circular opening in the dome showed the darkening twilight sky.
Standing by the altar was a figure that made Elara's blood run cold. He was an old man, slender and frail-looking in rich, dark robes, but his eyes were pools of absolute black, holding no light, no emotion, only a bottomless intellectual hunger. This was the High Ascendant. Lord Cyric, you return, and you bring guests, the Thornheart Alpha, the Selene whelp, and the child. His black eyes lingered on Elara, a spider considering a fly. The crown, I see, is subdued. Wise. It will make the extraction less volatile. They wish to bargain, Ascendant, Cyric said, bowing low. Bargain? The Ascendant's lips twitched in a mockery of a smile. You have nothing to bargain with, Thornheart, but my master does enjoy gloating. Very well. I will take you to the Eclipse Citadel. You can plead your case before the High Ascendant. He will enjoy that before he drains your mate and breaks your heir. He struggled to his feet, eyeing the dormant crown on Elara's head with avarice. The girl and the crown come with me. You and your beta will be disarmed and bound for real. Under the watchful eyes of the remaining cowed mercenaries, Theron and Evander submitted to having their hands properly tied. Their real weapons were confiscated, though Theron managed to palm a small, sharp shard of the green wolf iron into his sleeve. Elara was pulled to Cyric's side, his hand vice-like on her arm. Kaelen was forced to walk beside a brutish guard. As they were marched out of the heart chamber, back through the glowing tunnels, Elara caught Theron's eye. His gaze was a promise, a silent vow that thrummed through the bond that had grown between them, stronger than any rope. They were walking into the lion's den, but they were not lambs to the slaughter. They were a king, a queen, a prince, and a loyal knight entering the darkness together, a spark of moonlight ready to ignite a revolution.
As the Ascendant's fingers brushed the cool silver of the circlet, Elara stopped hiding. She let the power surge. The crown blazed to life, the moonstone erupting with a pure, blinding silver light that filled the chamber. The guards holding her cried out, recoiling as if scalded. The Ascendant stumbled back, his black eyes wide with shock and then furious delight. She is awake, perfect, the power is ripe. But Elara wasn't just shining, she was singing. She poured every ounce of her will, every memory of peace from the temple, every bond of love for Theron and Kaelen into a single, focused command. It wasn't aimed at the Ascendant or the guards. It was aimed at the hollow-eyed eclipse wolves who lined the walls. Remember. The command was not a shout, but a whisper that pierced the deepest parts of their souls. It carried with it the feeling of a cool night wind, the joy of a pack hunt, the comfort of a mate's touch, the fierce protectiveness for pups, everything the eclipse had tried to beat out of them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the armored wolves shuddered. He dropped his spear. Another let out a choked sob, clawing at his helmet. A ripple of awakening went through them, a crack in the perfect, soulless facade the Ascendant had built. "No! Silence her!" the Ascendant screamed. Chaos erupted, but not the kind he wanted. His own private army was crumbling from within, warriors fighting against years of conditioning, their true wolves howling in rebellion. Theron saw his chance. The guards chaining him were distracted. With a grunt of effort, he snapped the weakened rope bindings he'd never truly tightened and pulled the wolf iron shard from his sleeve. He didn't use it as a weapon, he used it as a key, jamming it into the mechanism of his manacles. They sprang open. He was free. He grabbed the distracted guard, using the man's own sword to cut Evander loose. They were armed now, backs against the wall, facing the heart of the chaos. Elara stood by the altar, a beacon of silver light, holding the attention of the Ascendant and his most loyal guards. Cyric, seeing his prize and prestige slipping away, drew a dagger and lunged at her, desperate to reclaim his moment. He never reached her. Theron crossed the chamber in 3 great strides. He didn't roar. He moved with the silent, deadly purpose of a shadow. As Cyric raised his dagger, Theron's stolen sword flashed. Cyric froze, a look of utter surprise on his face, then crumpled to the floor. Theron stepped over his body and stood beside Elara, facing the livid ascendant. They were a united front, the Alpha King with a bloodied sword and the Moon Queen crowned in radiant light. "Your eclipse ends tonight," Theron declared. The ascendant, his face a mask of insane rage, screamed not in words, but in a high, piercing whistle. From dark doorways around the chamber, new figures emerged. These were not broken wolves. They were the ascendant's inner circle, fanatics whose eyes glowed with the same sickly yellow light as Cyric's medallion, immune to Elara's awakening song. They were alphas and betas who had willingly sold their souls for the promise of power in the new, silent world. The real fight for the soul of the wolfkind was about to begin, in the heart of the darkness, under a sky waiting for an eclipse. Chapter 13. The Eclipse and the Dawn. The chamber became a maelstrom of light and shadow. The awakened Eclipse warriors, confused and fighting their own programming, clashed with the still loyal fanatics. It was a chaotic, brutal melee, brother against broken brother. Theron and Evander formed a defensive knot around Elara, who was the epicenter of the storm. Her light was a balm to their allies, a disorienting glare to their enemies. But the fanatics, protected by their yellow amulets, pressed the attack with fanatical zeal. They fought with an unnerving, synchronized skill, their movements devoid of individual flair, all efficiency and cold, killing intent. Theron fought like a demon, his sword deflecting blows meant for Elara, his body a moving shield. But he was one man against a tide. A fanatic's blade scored a deep gash across his thigh. He stumbled, going down on one knee. "Theron!" Elara cried out, her light flickering with her distress. Seeing his father wounded, a sound erupted from Kaelen's cage, not a scream of fear, but a sharp, clear howl of pure, infant alpha rage. It was a sound of defiance that cut through the din. The cage bars, old and rusty, shook. The ascendant, watching from his place of relative safety near the altar, hissed in frustration. "The lineage is strong! Crush them! The moon rises! We must begin!" The fanatics redoubled their efforts. Evander took a heavy blow to the shoulder, his arm going limp. Their defensive circle was collapsing. Elara saw Theron bleeding, Evander faltering, Kaelen trapped. The desperate love and fear within her coalesced with the power of the crown. She understood now. She was not a warrior to fight this battle with claw and tooth. She was the heart, and a heart could not beat if it was only defending. She had to attack, not with force, but with truth. She stopped trying to command the fanatics. Instead, she reached out with her power, not to their minds, but to the source of their corruption, the yellow amulets they wore. She poured her awareness into the moonstone on her brow, seeking the nature of the amulet's power. It was a binding, yes, but a perverse one. It didn't just block her command, it leached the wearer's connection to the moon, replacing it with a hollow, parasitic link to the ascendant's will. It was a lie, and Elara's power, at its core, was about revealing truth. She focused all her energy, all the ancient knowledge from the well, into a single, piercing beam of pure, Selene light. It shot from the moonstone, not at a person, but at the central black altar. The altar was the nexus, the amplifier for the ascendant's control and the intended focal point for the ritual. Her light struck the black stone. For a second, nothing happened. Then a web of silver cracks appeared on its surface. A high-pitched shriek like tearing metal filled the air. The yellow amulets worn by the fanatics flared brightly and then shattered.
The effect was instantaneous. The fanatics froze mid-swing, their synchronized movements breaking into jerky, disjointed spasms. The hollow light died in their eyes, replaced first by confusion, then by dawning horror as they felt the return of their own stolen emotions, their own muted wolf spirits. The weight of what they had done, what they had become, crashed down on them. Many dropped their weapons, falling to their knees with cries of anguish or sobs of relief. The Ascendant stared, his mouth agape, his perfect control unraveling before him. Impossible! The conduit! Your conduit was built on a stolen silence. I have given them back their voices.
With his inner circle broken, the Ascendant was defenseless. The awakened Eclipse warriors, now clear-eyed, turned their weapons on their former master, their expressions a mix of fury and shame. But the Ascendant was not finished. With a snarl of utter hatred, he pulled a jagged ceremonial dagger from his robes, made of pure black obsidian, and lunged not at Elara, but toward Kaelen's cage. If I cannot have the future, then no one will. He was fast, driven by madness. Theron, wounded, tried to rise but couldn't close the distance. Elara's light was still focused on the crumbling altar. It was Evander. With a final surge of strength from his good arm, the loyal Beta threw his body between the Ascendant and the cage. The black dagger meant for Kaelen sank deep into Evander's chest. Time seemed to stop. Evander met Theron's horrified gaze, gave a slight, pained nod, and then slumped to the floor. A roar of pure, unadulterated grief and rage tore from Theron's throat. He found strength in agony, surging to his feet and crossing the space in a blur. Before the Ascendant could pull the dagger free, Theron's hands were around the old man's throat. "You took my Beta," Theron whispered, the words more terrifying than any shout. "You took my friend." The Ascendant clawed at his hands, his black eyes wide with real, mortal fear for the first time. Theron did not strangle him. He simply held him, his grip unbreakable, and turned to look at the now clear opening in the dome. Outside, the lunar eclipse had begun. The moon, once full and bright, was being slowly devoured by the shadow of the earth. "You wanted an eclipse?" Theron said, his voice cold as the void. "Watch yours end." He dragged the struggling Ascendant to the edge of the sunken altar area, directly into the path of the fading moonlight. As the last sliver of silver was about to be consumed by shadow, Theron forced the Ascendant to look up. "Behold the last moonlight you will ever see." The shadow passed completely. For a moment there was total darkness in the shaft of light. Then, as the moon began its emergence from the earth's shadow, the first slender crescent of light reappeared. It fell directly onto the Ascendant's face. He screamed. It was not a scream of pain, but of dissolution. The tiny sliver of pure, returning moonlight filtered through the sacred chamber and, amplified by the shattered altar and Elara's presence, acted like a scalpel on his corrupted soul. The blackness in his eyes evaporated like mist in the sun. His body didn't die, it simply unraveled. He collapsed into a pile of empty robes and fine ash, his essence unable to withstand the return of the very light he had sought to destroy. Silence descended, heavy and profound. The eclipse was passing, moonlight slowly flooding back into the chamber. Theron limped to where Evander lay. Elara was already there, her hands glowing with soft silver light pressed over the dreadful wound. Her tears streamed down her face. "Evander, stay with us," Theron begged, his own tears mixing with the blood on his face. The Beta's eyes were cloudy with pain, but he managed a weak smile. "My Alpha, my friend, I see. The moon is beautiful again." His gaze shifted to Elara, to the crown. "Your queen is radiant." His breath hitched. "Protect your pack."
His eyes closed. Elara poured every ounce of her healing light into him, but the obsidian dagger had pierced something vital. The light could only ease his passing. With a final, peaceful sigh, Captain Evander, the steadfast Beta, loyal unto death, was gone. Theron bowed his head, a sob wrenching from his chest. Elara placed a hand on his shoulder, her own grief a solid weight. Around them, the awakened warriors of the eclipse stood in stunned silence, their fanatical war over, replaced by the grim reality of loss and liberation. From his cage, Kaelen called out softly, "Papa? Mama?" The words shattered the moment of grief, reminding them of what had been saved, of what they still had to live for. Theron wiped his face, the king's mask settling over the grieving friend. He stood, and with Elara's help, broke open the cage. Kaelen slew into their arms, the three of them holding each other tightly in the growing moonlight, a family forged in fire, sealed in sacrifice, and crowned in light. They had won. The eclipse was broken, its leader destroyed, its army reclaimed or scattered. But the cost was etched on blood on the stones of the citadel, and in the hollow space in Theron's heart where a brother had stood. As the full moon reclaimed the sky, shining down on the mesa of pain, Elara, with her crown glowing softly, looked at the broken warriors around her, at her grieving mate, and at her son. The path ahead was not of simple peace. It was a path of rebuilding, of healing a world wounded by shadow, of leading wolves who had forgotten what it meant to howl at the moon with joy instead of fear. She was the moon's daughter, and her reign, born in struggle and sacrifice, was just beginning. Chapter 14. The Crown of Thorns and Moonlight. The victory in the Eclipse Citadel was ash in their mouths, bitter with the taste of Evander's loss. They did not linger in the hollowed-out mesa. With a handful of the most clear-eyed former Eclipse warriors, now self-proclaimed penitents sworn to atone, they gathered their dead and fled the place of shadows. They carried Evander's body wrapped in a dark eclipse banner, a final irony for the loyal Beta who had died under the enemy's symbol. Their journey back to Stonehaven was a somber procession. The lightness of their journey to the mountains was gone, replaced by a heavy, shared grief. Theron walked with a pronounced limp, his face a mask of stoic pain that had little to do with his wounded leg. Elara kept Kaelen close, the boy often reaching up to silently hold his father's hand, offering a small, warm comfort. The crown on Elara's brow no longer blazed. It glowed with a gentle, steady light, like a persistent evening star. It was a quiet promise, a reminder of the power that had broken the eclipse, but also of the responsibility that now rested upon her. News of their approach and of the cataclysmic events at the Citadel flowed ahead of them like a spring thaw. When the gray towers of Stonehaven finally appeared on the horizon, they were met not by a wary garrison, but a gathering. The entire pack, from the highest warrior to the lowest omega from the kitchens, had assembled on the rolling fields before the keep. They stood in a silent, awe-struck multitude. Whispers had become roars. The Alpha had returned with the lost prince, who now spoke. The scourge of the eclipse was shattered, and walking beside their king was the scullery maid, now crowned with moonlight, her being that of a queen who had faced the abyss and forced it to blink. As Theron, Elara, and Kaelen reached the edge of the crowd, the sea of people parted. At the forefront stood Alaric, his face pale with worry and shining with relief. Beside him, to Elara's surprise, was her grandmother, Lena. The old woman was frail, leaning on a cane, but her eyes were clear and bright, filled with tears of joy and a deep, knowing pride. The royal healers had done their work. Alaric stepped forward, his scholar's mind struggling with the reality before him. "Brother, Elara, the rumors are true," Theron said,
his voice carrying over the silent field, rough with exhaustion and grief. "The order of the eclipse is broken, their high ascendant is dust, but the cost was high." His voice faltered for a moment as he gestured to the wrapped form carried by the penitents. "Captain Evander gave his life to save your prince. He died a Beta's death, loyal, brave, and true." A ripple of sorrow went through the crowd. Evander had been beloved. Theron continued, drawing strength from Elara's presence beside him. "In this fight, we discovered a truth long buried, a truth our enemies feared enough to try and erase from the world." He turned to Elara, and his expression softened into something profound. "This is Elara, not of the kitchens, but of the first blood, the last daughter of the Selene line, the living voice of the moon goddess's covenant. She is the reason our son found his voice. She is the light that broke the shadow. By ancient right, by proven courage, and by my own heart's choice, she is your Luna." He turned to face her fully, there before his entire pack. He took her hands in his, ignoring protocol, speaking only to her, though his words were for all to hear. "Elara of the Selene, you have saved my son, you have saved my soul, you have saved this pack from a darkness we did not fully understand. Will you stand by my side, not as a caretaker or a proxy, but as my equal, as my Luna and my queen?" The field was utterly silent. Every eye was on Elara. She saw doubt in some faces, awe in others, and in her grandmother's eyes, pure love. She felt the weight of the crown, not as a burden, but a connection, to the ancient well, to the struggling wolves around her, to Theron and Kaelen. She looked up at Theron, seeing the king, the warrior, the grieving friend, and the man who had offered her his unprotected heart. Her voice, when it came, was clear and carried on the breeze, amplified by the quiet power within her. "I am not a noblewoman bred for court. I am a seamstress's grandmother, who knows the taste of hard bread and the feel of cold floors." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the pack. "But I have also felt the heart of the moon. I have seen the bonds that tie us all together, Alpha, Beta, Omega, into one pack, one people. I have seen what happens when those bonds are severed. I will stand with Alpha Theron. I will be mother to Kaelen, and I will strive with every breath to be a Luna for all of you, to heal the rifts, to honor the bonds, and to remind this pack that our strength was never meant to be a weapon against each other, but a shelter for one another." Her words, simple and sincere, woven with the subtle compulsion of her truth, did what no decree could. They resonated. An Omega from the back, emboldened, let out a soft howl of approval. It was taken up by another and another, until the field echoed with a chorus of welcoming howls, not of submission, but of acceptance. The coronation was not a lavish state event. It was held in the stone courtyard of Stonehaven at twilight, under the emerging stars. Alaric, acting as lorekeeper, recited the ancient rites of the Selene, rediscovered from the temple tome. Theron himself placed a second circlet beside her moonlit crown, a band of twisted thorn and silver, the traditional symbol of the Thornheart Luna. "A crown of thorns and a crown of moonlight," Theron said as he placed it gently. "One for the hardship of this world, one for the hope of the next. Wear them together, as we will face this world together." As the packs cheered, Elara felt the final pieces of her old life fall away. She was not Elara any longer. She was Luna Elara of the Selene, queen of the Thornheart pack. Chapter 15. The First Howl of Peace. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet revolution. Luna Elara did not take to a sequestered throne. She walked the keep, the village, the training grounds. She visited the healing halls. Her mere presence and gentle touch seemed to ease pain and speed recovery. She sat in the kitchens, listening to the Omega's concerns, and in the warriors' hall, hearing the soldiers' grievances.
Her authority did not come from fear, but from a disarming empathy and the undeniable, gentle power that radiated from her. She and Alaric pored over the temple tome, translating its wisdom. They established a new council that included not just alphas and senior betas, but respected omegas and healers. The rank of heart, they called it, a place for the pack's spirit and well-being to have a voice. Theron, guided by her, began to change his laws. The harsh punishments for minor transgressions were softened to restorative justice. Orphans were formally placed with willing families, not left to the dormitories. The rigid social barriers between ranks began, slowly, to blur, not by decree, but by the example set at the top. Kaelen blossomed. The silent, haunted boy was gone, replaced by a curious, chatty child who followed his mama Elara everywhere. He had nightmares still, but now he spoke of them, and the shadows lost their power in the light of his words. He began formal training, not just as a warrior, but in history and diplomacy, a prince being shaped for a new kind of kingdom. Yet grief had its seat at their table. Theron often retired to Evander's old post in the guard tower, looking out over the territory his friend had helped him secure. Elara gave him space to mourn, but was always there with a quiet presence when he returned, her hand in his a silent testament to the future they were building from the ashes of the past. One evening, as the first snow dusted the battlements, they stood together in their private solar, watching Kaelen try to teach a patient stable dog to shake paws. "He has your patience," Theron remarked, his arm around Elara. "And your stubbornness," she replied, leaning into him. A comfortable silence fell. Then Theron spoke, his voice thoughtful. "The emissary from the Silvermane pack arrives tomorrow. They have heard everything. They are nervous. A Selene queen changes the balance of power." "I do not want their power. I want their partnership. The eclipse may be broken, but its poison spread far."
Distrust between packs, the suppression of omegas, the glorification of strength over compassion, these shadows remain. We must be a light against that, not a new sun to blind them. Theron looked down at her, his winter eyes warm. "You speak like a queen who has ruled for decades, not months." "I speak," she said, turning to face him, "as a woman who loves her king and her pack and believes a better world is possible." She reached up, touching the twin circlets on her brow. "The thorns remind me of the cost. The moonlight shows me the way." He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. No kiss followed, only a profound meeting of eyes, a sharing of breath, a communion of souls that was deeper than any physical act. The faded bond, once a silent, grieving thread, now thrummed between them, vibrant and alive, a connection of shared purpose, deep respect, and a love that had been sown in duty, nurtured in danger, and was now blooming in peace. The next day, the Silvermane emissary, a proud old alpha, was received in the great hall. He expected intimidation, political maneuvering. He found instead a strong king and a serene queen, with a prince playing at their feet. He saw a court where warriors and healers debated openly. He felt, for the first time in a long while, the quiet, unifying aura of the moon's presence in Luna Elara's gaze. By the time he left, a new treaty was drafted, not of mutual defense, but of mutual aid and open communication. The Thornheart pack, under its unusual rulers, was becoming a beacon, a new center of gravity in the wolf-kind world. That night, at the full moon, Theron and Elara stood on the highest balcony. Below, in the courtyard and the fields beyond, the entire pack had gathered, not by order, but by desire. They looked to their Alpha and Luna. Theron howled first, a long, clear note of strength and sovereignty, of remembrance for those lost, and promise for the future. Then Elara lifted her face to the moon. Her howl was different. It was melody woven into power, a call that was both an invitation and a benediction. It spoke of healing, of unity, of bonds reforged. It was the howl of the heart of the pack. As her note hung in the icy air, the entire pack, alphas, betas, omegas, warriors, farmers, elders, and children joined in. It was not a chaotic roar, but a harmonious chorus, a symphony of belonging. For the first time in living memory, the Thornheart pack howled as one truly unified voice, their song rising to the moon that watched over them, a silver promise reflected in the crown of their queen. The boy who hated every woman had found his mother. The king who had built walls around his heart had found his queen, and the pack that had lived by the harsh law of tooth and claw had found its soul again. In the quiet that followed the echoing howl, with Kaelen's small hand in hers and Theron's strong presence at her side, Elara knew. The story was not about a poor Omega becoming a queen, it was about a lost light returning to a darkened world. Their journey had been through fire and shadow, but they had emerged, together, into the dawn of a new era. And this was only the first howl of a piece that was destined to echo through the ages.